This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 463 of the Late Round Podcast, with many shows that are part of the FanDuel Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. Every football fan dreams of meeting the greatest NFL players of all time, and FanDuel and GOAT Fuel have teamed up to make those dreams a reality. In FanDuel's GOAT Gauntlet series, powered by GOAT Fuel, fans will put their fantasy knowledge to the test by competing for a chance to take on the NFL's greatest of all time. Here's how it works. Over the course of the next 3 weeks, there will be 3 qualifier contests highlighting a specific position. Those who win the qualifier contest or roster the highest scoring player for that week's highlighted position, they'll be automatically entered into the finals, where they'll have their chance to play against 3 NFL GOATs, Jerry Rice, Emmitt Smith, and Warren Moon. And they'll compete to win their share of $10,000 in cash prizes, GOAT Fuel products, and an exclusive virtual meet and greet with the NFL Hall of Famers. For more details, visit FanDuel.com/GOATFuel or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Remember when Taysom Hill was ruining Alvin Kamara in fantasy football? Well, that got back on track in Week 14. Against the Eagles, Kamara saw a 27% target share, a number that was greater than his 3 previous games combined. And since Taysom Hill threw the ball 38 times, that big target share from Kamara resulted in 10 targets. And it just so happened to all come in a negative game script. You were never benching Alvin Kamara, but this should give you a little bit more confidence if Taysom Hill continues to be under center for the Saints. T.Y. Hilton has been balling out. He finished as a top 15 wide receiver in each of his last 3 games and a top 10 wide out in each of his last 2. Prior to this stretch, Hilton's highest wide receiver finish on the season was wide receiver 28. And this is absolutely correlated with more volume. Over his last 2 in particular, Hilton's averaged almost a 29% target share per game. He had more than a 20% share in just one single game from weeks 1 through 12. I would be confidently playing him this week against the Texans. We'll see how that goes before we declare him a safe play against Pittsburgh the next week. I bring up Sterling Shepard a lot on this show because I think he's just consistently underrated by the fantasy community. And he's consistently consistent too. He's now played 7 games since returning from injury. In those games, his lowest target share has been 20.8%. He's averaging a target share per game of about 24%. Now, he hasn't been totally lighting it up, don't get me wrong. That's especially true over the last 2 weeks where he's ranked outside the top 60 wide receivers in fantasy scoring. He's only posted a total of 12 fantasy points. But his previous 5 saw him averaging 14 PPR points per game and an average of 8 targets per game. It's not always easy to get such reliable volume from someone who's so irrelevant in fantasy football to many. Let's just hope that Daniel Jones can look better and finish the season strong. I whiffed big time on Miles Sanders this past week. Rookie quarterback, elite rush defense. I didn't like Sanders at all in that matchup. I recognize the ambiguity and the potential for upside, but he still far exceeded even those upside expectations. Now, with that being said, what we saw in Week 14 is why I was high on him entering the season. Against New Orleans, Sanders handled 82.4% of the Eagles' running back rushes, and he had a target share of 19.2%. That was his highest single-game target share of the season, and that was with Jalen Hurts. I've seen a lot of talk burying Miles Sanders, a lot of victory laps saying that his usage sucks, and that was predictable under Doug Peterson. But his usage really has not been bad at all. On the season, he's seen about 77% of his team's running back rushes when he's been healthy. His target share per game has been 12.6%. That's certainly not bad. It's just that the Eagles have been an absolute disaster offensively with Carson Wentz this year. And that has an effect on every skill player on that team, especially the running backs. Trend 5 is just your reminder that Cole Kmet has taken over the number 1 tight end job in Chicago. I know Jimmy Graham found the end zone in Week 14, but Kmet was able to compile his second straight performance with a 21% target share. And that's important because Chicago's been one of the more pass-friendly teams in football this year. So in back-to-back weeks, Kmet has 7 and 7 targets. That's not easy volume to find at the tight end position. The Buccaneers barely threw the ball against Minnesota, so the main wide receivers on the team didn't really do a whole lot. But it wouldn't be a 10 trend show if I didn't send some sort of update on what this pass-catching group for Tampa Bay is doing with Antonio Brown. And in Week 14, Brown bounced back, even if he wasn't very fantasy relevant. He saw a 23% target share. Mike Evans was also at 23%, but Chris Godwin was at 14%. It looks like their previous game was indeed just a weird one from a usage standpoint for Antonio Brown. That happens. Variance is a thing in football. We all know that. And I continue to expect Brown to hurt the upside for both Evans and Godwin on a weekly basis. Or I should say, I expect Brown to give each guy a lower floor. Either one of them can go off in a given game. It just may not be all that predictable. But fortunately, they've got a nice schedule here in weeks 15 and 16 where they face Atlanta and then Detroit. It's going to be tough to bench Evans or Godwin. Cam Akers is a workhorse. It's happening. We saw some signs that this was coming over the last month or so, which is why he was featured in the 15 transactions episode a couple of times. But week 14 was it. He became a workhorse. Against the Patriots, Akers saw 93.6% of LA's running back rushes, and he had a 12.5% target share. I mentioned how important that target share piece was last week, that he needed that to become a more reliable RB1, and he got it. To give you some context with these numbers, though, in relation to how the Rams have used their running backs this season, no Rams running back had hit a 90% running back rush share this year until Cam Akers did it in week 14. And Darrell Henderson, who was the Rams' top back for a lot of the season, he had over a 50% running back rush share just 3 times this year. To me, this isn't a situation where the Rams have done this before this year, and as a result, they're just going to keep rotating their lead backs. I don't see that being the case, because Henderson never came close to what Akers did in week 14. Maybe we don't see Akers with the same backfield share moving forward. That's definitely in his range of outcomes. But my bet is that he's their workhorse now after an awesome performance. This wasn't like other Rams running back performances this season. TJ Hawkinson has been low-key really good this season. I think people aren't fully recognizing it because he doesn't have these monster spiked weeks. But did you know that Hawkinson has finished as a top 8 weekly tight end in 8 of his 13 games played? That's just as many as Darren Waller. Meanwhile, only Kelsey, Waller, and George Kittle have a higher PPR points per game average. It hasn't been pretty, but Hawkinson has gotten it done this year. James Conner hasn't given us an RB1 performance since week 6. He's averaging just 6.4 points per game over his last 4 games. So what the hell is going on here? Well, during this 4-game stretch where he's been bad for fantasy purposes, he's averaged a running back rush share of 64%. Prior, that number was closer to 75%. Now, I'm less concerned about that, and I'm more concerned with 2 other things that are going on here. One is his target share. That's dropped more significantly. Across Conner's first 7 games, he averaged a target share per game of 9.3%. Over his bad 4-game stretch, that's been 3.8%. And then another thing that's been an issue is that the Steelers' offense isn't nearly as strong. Conner's not seeing scoring opportunities. After having that weird week 1 game where he got hurt, Conner scored a touchdown in 5 of his next 6 games. He hasn't scored once since. So a lot of things are sort of being pushed against James Conner right now. Fortunately, he does have a get-right game this weekend against Cincinnati, so he'll probably be a decent enough play. The last trend this week surrounds something that we saw on Monday night's crazy game. That game was awesome. But Mark Ingram only played 1 snap in that game against Cleveland. And that allowed J.K. Dobbins to see a 61.9% running back rush share. That's his second highest of the season. And his snap share was 62%, right in line with the highest of the season. Dobbins has now finished as the RB5, 20, and 18 over the last 3 weeks. We're seeing these rookie running backs emerge late, and it's a good reminder to not give up on good talent because they start their rookie seasons off slow, especially during a pandemic season. That's going to do it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And as always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter for some dad jokes at Late Round QB. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the weekly matchup show.